Mexico Grass tells the story of cannabis in the land of enchantment. From the Llano Estacado to Shiprock, and from the Sangre de Cristos down the Rio Grande and past Mesilla, the story of New Mexico is alive with culture and wisdom, and cannabis has long been a part of that tale. Please join us as we sit down with our friends and neighbors across this great state, and let's learn what they have to say.
So much for joining me here today. It's a real pleasure to have you here. The idea, as we were kind of discussing before we started filming here, was to really let the people of New Mexico meet some of the real key drivers in the industry here, both the existing medical platform that exists, but also this potentially, I say potentially because we're not there yet, but the potential legal commercial market that we will develop in the future. We're honored to have you. If I could just jump right into it, Pat, tell our viewers a little bit about your background, who you are, and sort of what brings you into this scene here in New Mexico.
Like everybody working in New Mexico cannabis, I have a long winding story of getting there, right? Like a lot of folks, I didn't get the privilege of growing up in New Mexico, but fell in love with it, and it fell in love with me. So I was a cop for years back east and a little while here in New Mexico. Got into public policy, and I really started working on that. Today, as you know, I'm a city councilor in Albuquerque, and last year the governor tapped me to head the governor's working group on cannabis legalization, where we spent a whole summer working on all of these challenges and building a roadmap for legalization. That bill last year morphed into this year's bill, which is mostly House Bill 12, which is seems to be the vessel and the vehicle through which we might legalize this year.
When I grew up in New Mexico my whole life, I grew up in Texaco. I went to high school at the Military Institute in Roswell. I'm a big fan of the state of New Mexico, but I left for a long time, like a lot of people do. I went to colleges elsewhere, and I ended up in New York for a long time. But now this cannabis legalization potential is bringing me back. But when I left New Mexico, this was a very much just say no to drug state, and it was took a hard line for a lot of these things. What do you think has been the difference in the past that has kind of eased New Mexico's views on this subject?
Well, don't forget that, I think, New Mexico has been squeezed between Texas and Arizona for a long time, right? And so lots of pressures from this part of the world to be the last and sort of getting ahead of this. But New Mexico broke away. Don't forget, Governor Gary Johnson was the guy who said decriminalize it all. And Darren White, his public safety director, resigned, later became sheriff, but couldn't do it, right? And now Darren runs a cannabis company here in New Mexico. So lots has changed. Bill Richardson was the governor when we passed our medical cannabis law, one of the first in the country. So we've really been leading on this, but I think a big piece of it is that folks have been here for a long time know that New Mexicans have been growing cannabis in one way or another for a really long time. Some of them are just now, some of our elders are just now coming out with the stories of their younger days or how they use it now for arthritis and other things. It's just not been taboo in New Mexico for a really long time.
I would agree. There is more of an underculture to the history of this cannabis plant than a lot of people, are acknowledging that exists. I happen to know that, at least here in eastern New Mexico. I know in the north as well, they have some similar things. Tell me a little bit about in the current legislation that's moving its way through the New Mexico Congress. The piece of legislation that seems to have the most favor has a micro license component in it. What can you tell me about the micro license? Who's it designed for? How do you sort of envision this working out?
Yeah, Brian, and just for folks who are just catching up, right? Remember that last year, the governor's working group had a model bill that we had all of these provisions in. One of those that lots of people liked was the idea of a micro license, which means that right now we have 34 medical licenses in New Mexico. Not all of them are being used, but they're out there in the world. Most of those folks are growing a lot of cannabis for medical. But that's an expensive prospect, right? It can be $1 million that you have to put in order to start one of those businesses. And let's be honest, most of us in New Mexico don't have that kind of cash.
That's right.
And so one of those provisions was that allowing those big dogs, like the big folks, to continue to do that work, but create some new licenses that say cap you at 100 plants. That's much more accessible for small farmers, small business owners, somebody who wants to create a boutique product. Think about, we talk about it a lot, thinking about the beer industry, right? You have these big breweries like La Cumbre, and then you have some really micro folks that are working in one little small town, have one one tap room and just a few barrels a week. So that's the kind of diversity we're looking for. So what micro licenses really mean is you get a license, you agree to have one door, so one place to sell it, one place to grow it, and usually about 100 plants. And somebody can make a living at that and can make some really cool boutique products that would appeal to a small audience. And that might be the solution for small town New Mexico, and even here in Albuquerque for somebody that develops something really unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, regarding the legislation that's moving through Congress as we speak, in the Senate, what, in your opinion, if you were going to handicap its odds of passing this year, what would you think?
Yeah, so this year last year we had 2 bills. This year we have 5 to get us started, right?
Right.
3 in the Senate, 2 in the House. But the bill that everybody seems to be behind is a bill called House Bill 12. It's sponsored by Representative Javier Martinez and Andrea Romero. It moved and it passed the State House, so halfway home. And it's now stuck in a few Senate committees, and they're going to hash this out. Look, if I had to put my money on it last year, I told you it's 50-50, and we got close but not there. I think this one is real close. It's 85% ready to go. The votes, it appears, the details matter, but the votes to pass this bill exist in the Senate when they didn't last year because of the election changed that. And the governor wants to see it happen. The real challenge are those micro details that we could spend the whole half hour talking about honestly, who benefits here. And that's really where this committee is getting through. But House Bill 12 is going to be the bill that I think you're going to see be that vehicle.
If there's an issue that is causing this bill to face more pain than something else, what would you say that is at this moment?
There are 2, and it all revolves around money, of course, right? At this point, folks that are looking at, is New Mexico going to legalize? Communities and local municipalities like Albuquerque are trying to figure out to be sure that we could recover extra revenue. Every politician loves to spend tax dollars, right?
Yeah.
But if you have a license in New Mexico, if you're one of those 34 producers, there's a big difference between the big dog, the folks that are growing 200 acres, for example, are ready to do that outdoors in southern New Mexico, and those small local producers. And so what the challenge is trying to figure out is, are we going to limit the number of plants those licenses can produce? In other words, there will be lots of different companies that have a limit and they can all sort of be on a level playing field. Yeah. Or are we going to have unlimited plants? So somebody could be the Walmart of cannabis in New Mexico, and that disadvantages some of the other folks in the industry, and that disadvantages equity. That's the big question that you're going to see. Yeah. There's still some other questions about home grow. Should we all be able to grow a few plants in our backyard or in our kitchen? That's also an issue, but one that's likely to get resolved. But the big question is, who can get a license and how many plants can they grow?
Yeah, and it's a really good point. It's an issue. So as we come at it from the small farm side, looking directly to participate in the micro license, I mean, we'll take whatever legislation we can get to get into the market, but we're sensitive. We understand this idea that these large players, you sort of mentioned the large guys in southern New Mexico. There's the idea that perhaps our market is so small that 1 or 2 really big concentrated folks could have a disproportionate impact, especially in the beginning when folks are trying to get invested, trying to make partnerships. If you've got someone that can just keep throwing massive supply at the market, I don't really know that benefits us. But so I hear what you're saying. Sensitive topic.
It is, but but let me play the other argument, right? Let me play devil's advocate for those folks. Now, I'm on the side of more folks being able to access this market, both in terms of creating businesses that they can pass along. That's equity for the next generation. It's hiring more local folks. But there's something to be said for the people that have spent a lot of time and capital and money to build the companies we have now.
Sure.
If we are serious about legalizing and moving this forward, we need those folks to be able to get started right away. They're going to generate revenue we need for the state, for our schools, for our kids, and give time for other producers to come on board. But as you know, like if you're a small producer, it still takes a lot of capital to build and get started. And so we've got to figure out, like, that's going to take longer to start a new business than it is to grow an existing one. So there's got to be a balance, both in terms of who gets a license and when that happens, so that big company number one doesn't become Walmart and push all the mom and pops, Main Street businesses out. That's a real challenge. And I'll be honest, and you know this, of all the states that have tried this so far, no one's gotten it right yet. And so if we can figure it out, New Mexico will pave the way for others.
Well, I think the micro license is a very unique play on the legalization. I don't want to say scheme, but the legalizations that have happened in various states. It's a really nice way to do things. Yeah, we are a small state, so concentration issues can be an issue. On the other side of it, if I look at it from the small player perspective, I have to go into it with the mindset that there's going to be a lot of competition, big guys, small, everyone. So I'm not going to waste too much time focusing on the southern part of New Mexico or anywhere else, because I've got my own fish to fry right here in Curry County, which is where we are. On the other side of it, though, I see 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, the federal market opening up. And as that market goes on, I also want to be able to grow as many plants as I can, right? Theoretically, at some point. So if I think of my long term, I would hopefully one day be in that position where I'm the bigger guy and I want to keep growing. So I do see both sides of the issue. You know, it's a complicated one.
It is, but what you just said, Brian, is exactly right. Like, look, I mean, you have one of your neighbors, Heath out there in Roosevelt County, has been growing hemp for a long time. He was one of those first farmers, and he was one of the folks that got one of the very few Amazon hemp licenses to grow. And so he turned a really small New Mexico farm from eastern New Mexico into a national player on CBD and hemp products because he had access to that market. And so, we've got to give more people that, because what you don't want to end up with is that all these companies end up in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces, and the rest of New Mexico gets left out again. We don't want to repeat the lessons from some of our other economic growth. So there's got to be a balance. And look, no matter where your politics are, I think you have to give Governor Lujan Grisham credit for this one by saying from the very beginning 3 years ago that is one of the four pillars of things we've got to get accomplished, is to be sure everybody gets to participate. Even by the most conservative estimates, we're talking about 11,000 jobs in the state of New Mexico over the first 5 years, because somebody's got to grow it, somebody's got to sell it, somebody's got to package it and manufacture it. And because it's cannabis, none of those jobs can be exported to other states. We've all got to hire ourselves, and folks in Curry County need jobs too.
Absolutely. And more than just as you mentioned, the production jobs and the people selling. As a business, we're buying lights, we're buying fertilizer, we're buying equipment, we're putting up buildings, we're hiring contractors, and we've already been doing this for a year and a half, and it's not even legal yet. You're right. It takes a lot of investment. It takes a lot of foresight, and I do give the governor a ton of credit on this issue, especially. She's been out in the forefront. And again, like I always try to bring it back to what things are really about in the state of New Mexico, which is business. The state, and even in the United States, the business of the United States is business. This is a great business to start in the state. And I do give the governor a lot of credit. And I think you've also been a big advocate for everything. So we really appreciate your efforts. Thanks. How do you see yourself, or do you see yourself fitting into the cannabis industry post legalization?
Well, I'm not here. I have plenty of jobs already, right? I'm still a city councilor in Albuquerque. You and I were talking before. We started a new newspaper in Albuquerque, just called the paper. It's abq.news. We did that over the summer with some friends to give us some more news competition. And we've got the only full-time a regular cannabis reporter in the state of New Mexico, Josh Lee. A lot of folks know Josh from his Alibi columns. Writes a cannabis column every Thursday with us. So I think I've got a lot going on. But what I think is interesting is the number of people who are showing up from out of New Mexico that are starting to take a look at this, because you talked about somebody's going to sell the fertilizer and the lights and all of that. I spend a lot of time as a politician with a lot of folks who don't necessarily agree with me, but we work on stuff together. And I'll tell you, even the more the commercial real estate folks, for example, are very excited to start selling warehouses to cannabis producers. Electricians in Albuquerque, there are a couple that specialize in growing, and they would love to outfit those new warehouses. So this isn't just people who are going to put a hand on a plant. As you said, almost everybody in New Mexico can touch this, even if you never buy a product.
No, absolutely. You mentioned these kinds of business. There's a business in Albuquerque that runs that they sell shipping containers, and they're converting these reefer shipping containers into drying and curing facilities for cannabis. Last time I called them, they said they're selling out like hotcakes.
Not happening.
You know, it's a great business to be in. I give the state a lot of credit. You mentioned the paper. What are some of the other things you're up to? I think that's great. This paper is awesome. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's unfortunately, Albuquerque used to be a 3-paper town, right? It used to be the Albuquerque Journal, the Albuquerque Tribune, and the Alibi.
Yeah.
Over the years, we lost the Trib, and this summer we lost the Alibi. And so some friends and I got together. My business partner, Abby Lewis, our editor, Tierna Unruinos, and some other folks. And we said, let's not let us just be a 1-paper town. So we started a new newspaper, New Mexico. It's free. Anybody can get it at abq.news. And I'll tell you, we were talking earlier, we've now had over 20,000 New Mexicans who get our daily newspaper. We have everything from business to regular news. We've led the coverage on Deb Haaland's confirmation. Broke some really big news stories around some of the New Mexicans involved in the Capitol incursion on January the 6th. So our folks are really hustling and doing great work. But like I said, it's not just for New Mexico. It's not just for Albuquerque. Like there's a need for folks to want to have good stories about what's working for New Mexico. And it's been good to tell those stories. You know, we just told a story last week about a Seattle company who is leading their field in the field of like radiation prevention. And they were looking for a second location. So they came to Albuquerque, they found sunshine, they found accessible houses there people could afford because they're living in Seattle and, you know, you can't live there anymore and afford to. Instead of just opening a second facility, they chose to move their entire company and 500 people from Seattle to Albuquerque. And that's the kind of story we want to be telling, and New Mexicans want to hear more. I think that's the cool piece about where we are right now.
I think that's awesome. I don't even watch or read a lot of media, and I've been reading your newspaper because it's a different voice. It's not the same thing. I think that's fantastic. And I'm also someone, I lived 18 years in New York, and this potential cannabis legalization is what has brought me back here, is what has me investing here in our facility at Steel outside of Clovis. And none of this would have been possible without this effort to move forward with the legalization. So I really do appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to leave our viewers with? Anything you'd like to plug or say as we sort of head out?
Yeah, here's my pitch, right? We started last year with legalization with a plan that we knew was good and needed some input, but knew it was good, but wasn't likely to pass because we didn't have the right number of legislators in the right places. Yeah. Voters got rid of some folks that were in the way for some big long-term challenges in New Mexico. One of those issues is cannabis, but here's the thing. We've got less than now 2 weeks until the legislature adjourns, and that clock stops everything. It doesn't matter who your senator is, call your senator, tell them you want legalization, tell them to stop fighting and start working out the details, because there are too many people needing jobs, another year can't go by to do this. We have the votes, but even if your senator's not on one of those committees, they have friends that are, and they know what needs to be done. We've almost passed the state budget. We've gotten all the other big things out of the way. This is the last big thing to fight about, and it's not worth fighting about anymore. 77% of New Mexicans say they want it, but if you need it, call your state senator. You don't need to call the governor. You don't have to call the House representatives. They've already voted for it. Yeah. But your senator needs to put some pressure on folks to move it quickly, because this could change New Mexico.
Excellent. That's a great point. I'll reiterate it. Call your senator. I totally agree with you. Pat Davis, thank you so much for joining us. You're our first guest. We couldn't be more happy and proud to have you here. Take care, and thanks for everything you've done.